Hello, and thank you for listening to this Bournbrook podcast. If you follow us on Twitter or tuned into last week's episode of The Week in Review, you'll know that we've been censored by YouTube. As a result, we've taken the decision to move full episodes of our shows over to the Bournbrook website as of next week. Clips will remain here on YouTube, but if you want full episodes, go over to bournbrookmag.com/podcasts or find us on Spotify. Links in the description. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to Your Life in 10, Episode 5, with Bournbrook's editor, Michael Curzon. Enjoy the show. What is your earliest memory?
No, I don't think the earliest main event I can remember, which sounds straight away like I'm trying to vie for some sorrow, but it's not. The earliest thing I can remember fully is having appendicitis, which I had at 8. But that can't be my earliest memory because that'd be ridiculous.
Unless something really bad happened before you were 8, and you sort of just buried it.
Not that I know, but this might be like one of those therapy sessions where I'm about one thing and end up finding out something else. No, one thing I just remembered actually from primary school is I don't know if I remember this more because I'm told about it so often, but there's a few occasions in year 1 reception which I remember. I think one of them being on the back of one of these toy scooters which we had out. There was someone else was pedaling and I was on the back and full pelt into a fence. Him jumping off and telling me to do the same, but for some reason I didn't. I carried on going and whacked my head on the fence. And the other one is this person who must by that point have been in year 6. There was a friend of my sister who was still at school at the time, but had a bit of a reputation, I was told afterwards, for being quite hard. Me going up to him, telling him I was quite hungry, and for some reason chewing on his jumper and pulling my tooth out as a result. I remember that. I don't remember doing that, but I do remember standing over one of the sinks in the school toilets with blood coming out of my mouth. But that sets me up as being quite a.
No, I mean you kind of just get into that kind of thing when you're a kid, and you kind of don't you have no understanding of consequences. I remember being about 5 or 6. My dad coming to get me from school, and my dad's kind of like a no BS Israeli guy from the mountains. And I told him that this kid was like picking on me, and I just commented, "Well, punch him." And so I just went, okay. And I went as a kid, and like in front of all the parents, I just gave him one.
I can't say I've got much like that.
I suppose the point is it's a really strange time between like reception and year 2 where you don't really know what right or wrong are. You kind of just go with it.
Absolutely.
Well, what are the this is sort of a precursor to the book segment, but what sort of books do you remember reading as a kid?
I was very fond. I remember early on I read most of the Roald Dahl books, which was sort of the staple, I think, of most people our age. And I also was quite fond of the Horrible History series. And I remember reading some of that, but it didn't take long until my granddad tried to push me onto other books and to instill his influence onto me, which I'm very grateful for now. So it changed over to Dickens, and not that long after Zola, working the way up to Tolstoy, which we'll talk about soon, I'm sure. So mainly fictional. I didn't really read anything non-fictional until I was, well, other than the Horrible Histories, which is as a child, which was more of a more for the fictional element, I think, actually, if anything, even if something was picked up from it. But I didn't start reading non-fiction books until I was about 16, and that was the impact of the EU referendum, as again with my age,
Right.
got us interested in politics. Some for better, some for worse, and I don't know which category I'm in.
How old would you have been when the referendum happened?
Well, I was just too young to vote. I was
Right.
out by just less than a month. You had to be 18 as well, didn't you? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was 17. My birthday's in July. The referendum was 23rd of June. So I wrote to a number of local newspapers and had a couple of articles published because I got interested in it and went to conferences and tried to speak on it when I could as a yapping child.
Like a like a
I
young
felt
like a young William Hague at a conference.
not that bad. I mean, I'm always mocked for being quite red in the face naturally, but I think if I was to look at myself at that age doing those speeches now, I'd become even more blushed. It's embarrassing thinking back on some of the affiliations I had, but I suppose
Yeah.
we'll have to go through it to end up realizing their downsides at a later point.
Hmm. What is your first book?
My my grandfather soon pushed me onto books by Dickens, and I could have chosen a Dickens book, and I was quite tempted to actually. But my favourite author, and I realised this as soon as I read the first book, and I've read many of his books since, is Emile Zola, a French writer from the 19th century who lived in London for some time because he was under fire from the authorities for defending a Jewish army general, I
Uh,
believe. Right.
Dreyfus. Yeah, Dreyfus. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, who had been accused of this and that incorrectly. And the books that Zola wrote were um, incredibly human. I think his style is called naturalistic, I suppose. And one of his most known works or cycles of works was the Rogue Macquart series, um, in which there's 20 books. And the point is to start out from a couple of family members and then through the books to go down the family tree into very distant relations, close relations. And you don't necessarily have to read all of them to make sense, and you don't actually have to read them in order. In fact, there's two orders of the books. So I always change the
yeah.
configuration of my bookshelf when I change my mind on what's the best one. There's
Hmm.
the order they were actually released, and then the order which Zola said they should be read in. But the point of the books is to try and show the impact of family, essentially, which traits go down through the branches to distant members and close members, and even the characters who are largely good have the negative traits from some of the nasty figures from above, weaning in from time to time. Um, and I struggled with out of two of them which I preferred. I think the first I read was Germinal, which is about a protest in a mining town, where the miners weren't being given enough money, enough pay to live, and so protested, especially because of the presence of a young-blooded revolutionary who wanted to try and show the workers how it should be, and that has interesting consequences. But I think actually my favourite is L'Assommoir, which I think in
Hmm. Hmm.
English translates roughly as the drinking den, which is a hideous book. Actually, it's terribly
Hmm.
sad.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite gritty. It's about poverty and drink and
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
at the beginning, the book's well, not at the very beginning, but part of the book is very jolly. And one of the things I really like about Zola, similar to Dickens, actually, here, I think he took influence from him, is the very long descriptions of something which really doesn't need to be described. So there's a very long section on a visit to the Louvre,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
the different art pieces there, and I think more than anything, it serves as a very nice historical piece about the nature of Paris at the time, in the same way that Germinal is very much a historical piece about the condition of minds at the time, because Zola, the reason he's such a great author is because he wasn't just sitting in a room writing these things based on what he'd thought or even what he'd read, but he spent a lot of time going to mines and experiencing the lives of mine workers. And in the same way, he would go to all the places that he describes. One of his books, The Belly of Paris, is just about food and the food markets in Paris. And he spent years and years, obviously, around these markets and knew every corner of them. And so was such a great author when it came to translating the stories. But no, l'Assommoir is one of the best. Terribly sad.
Yeah.
But a must read for anybody who wants to learn a little more about the human condition.
It's fascinating because when you mentioned Zola, I was hoping that you'd mention one of two books, and one of them is l'Assommoir. It's the other one being Nana. And yeah, the meticulous research of that book is when you read more about it is remarkable. I mean, I said he wasn't just sitting in a room writing about it. I believe he included what would then have been seen as being like blue language, very very sort of idiosyncratic working class French slang that the upper and middle classes who were reading the book weren't at all familiar with.
Absolutely, and that's credit to him there, and that wouldn't have helped in the view of his character among officialdom when the Dreyfus affair came up, I'm sure. But no, I think also he was criticised by a lot of his contemporaries because of the sort of naturalistic elements of his work, how real some of it was, even when it was horrible and gritty. Some of the stories of the impacts of poverty. There's some terribly moving sections on domestic abuse as well, and a mother who, despite all circumstances, does all that she can to care for a child, and from which leads to a terrible demise. It's not the most positive or upbeating reading, but it's very educational actually, and incredibly moving.
Let's go to book 2. What's your second pick?
Well, this one I've worked up to for a long time to try and read. At the minute I can't read anything actually. I'm in that stage where I wake up early and work, and then I try and have a break and read something, but my mind is too set on the work, and I can't read a book if it takes me any more than a week, because my mind just won't focus for that long. So I'm glad I read it when I did, rather than try to do so now, because it's War and Peace, which is a beast of a book.
Massive, yeah. I mean, it's sort of it's like you know how they use like Hoover for vacuum cleaner. They use War and Peace for like long book. It's like the quintessential mammoth book.
Yeah, but it's not a single page could be taken out though with any justification, because I mean, this is a book where I've tried to get other people to read it, and some of them have been bored by. If you're not as interested in history, then it's not worth reading, because it's. I remember reading the introduction after I read the book, which is always the way you should do it, by the way. Never read the introduction first, because so many introduction authors ruin the book at the beginning before you've had a chance to get into it. But it's hard to define it as a novel as such, because it's just as much a book of political theory, or even a historical account of the time that it details. It's so many things at once, which is incredible. And the end part, actually, I can't remember the word, the post text essentially has 2 sections which aren't really about the book at all, but are again about a study of history and its sort of cyclical nature, which is really interesting. And there's long details of battles which were fought, which Tolstoy had immense knowledge of. Again, a very intelligent man, but also such a wonderful story. If you do read it, make sure to have a version with a list of characters at the beginning, because you'll find yourself referring to it time and time again.
I find that a lot with Russian authors, Dostoevsky too, where obviously because I'm not particularly used to Russian naming custom. Yeah, you should have like a little index card laminated next to you while you're reading it, a book in one hand and an index in the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Same as Zola, actually.
it's almost quite similar. The production of this novel to L'Assommoir, where it's I believe the Tolstoy wrote 60 years after the setting of the novel.
Hmm.
So it's set, it's set in Napoleonic wars, and it's written decades after. But he interviewed a lot of people who witnessed the conflict.
And he would have been to the scenes as well, and in the same way as I forget the name. It's so famous, but not because of the book now, unfortunately. Les Miserables. It always makes me laugh when a series was being made about Les Mis with no singing in it, and people said, "Well, how can you do that? The whole point of Les Mis is that it's a musical." Um, but no, in the same sense that Victor Hugo visited the scenes, he knew what he was talking about when he was writing about the massive battles that were going on, and in many ways, the understanding of the battles and the scenes doesn't matter to the story, but when you've taken it all in, it really helps you picture yourself being within these scenes, and it really contextualizes the writing, and it's incredibly effective. I mean, shorter books have their place, and can still be very interesting and invigorating and as capturing, but these books are something else. It takes you through a whole experience. And I remember actually, I was lucky when I read this. I was on holiday at the time in Wales, and we were in this nice little cottage. And I'd wake up every morning, partly by choice to go and read, but partly because of the fact that on my ceiling there's one of those sort of ones where the window is on the ceiling, and a bird would come on every single morning and patter about, which would get me up. But that got me up early enough to go down the garden, which was nice, and have a drink and read it. And it's a book which is worth taking notes to whilst you're reading it, because there's nothing from it that you want to forget. It's so quotable, but a wonderful book again.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's got a scale that only a book of that length could have as well.
Yeah, and it was his first book as well, which amazes me when I found that out. That someone should begin their novel writing career with that. I'd be interested to know how that was taken. Actually, I know a bit about how Zola's works were received at the time, but I'm not actually aware of how well War and Peace was received. I imagine well, since it was written partly for different audiences. That's why there's so many French and English characters.
Yeah, I think it did pretty well from the off. Also, I mean, he managed to keep writing. There's something that Russian authors do a lot that I really like, which is they make Russia a character of its own, in a sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything from the sort of the untamed Russian wilderness to bizarre society. It has its own kind of beat and rhythm and life to it.
Yeah, and they use it, I suppose, in a sense like prophetic fallacy, where the environment mirrors the feelings within the characters. There's a great scene where I've not read it for some time, so I can't actually remember some of the characters' names, especially because there's so many. But one of the main characters, Pierre, maybe, is feeling very down about current situations, and he's on his way to visit somebody, and he's got some bad news which he knows he's going to receive, and even the environment around him is withered and cracked. This old oak tree that has gone past its prime and is split apart and broken and dead essentially. But on his return, on his triumphant return, when things are actually looking up, the environment is much different, which I know is very easy for an author to come up with, but it still evokes good emotion when reading.
What is your third book?
Well, like I said, I didn't come to non-fiction until a little bit of a later point. And I flirted around with all sorts of different books. I think one of the first I read, given that I was interested in the EU referendum, was one by Dan Hannan on whether or not to stay in the European Union, and that was all right. And I flicked around a few others and got interested in the work of Peter Hitchens. Actually, through his brother. I remember I also, at the same time as I got interested in the EU referendum, I became a massive anti-theist and was really interested in Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, a phase which has since passed. But I think happens in a lot of political people that they go through phases like this. And upon listening to a Christopher Hitchens Rex Christianity video, something like that, I stumbled across Peter Hitchens, and despite being of the different opinion at that time, still being fairly liberal, I imagine, whilst not knowingly, I was very interested in some of the things that he said, and acknowledged that I'd noticed this in my own life, some of the points he raised, and began to read his columns. And I think that was part of my coming to be a social conservative. But despite this, I think I read 3 books of his before I got to The Abolition of Britain, the first which he wrote, 1999. And now that I've read it, undoubtedly the best as well. Unbelievable book, which the impressive thing about it is that it doesn't just talk about the decline of Britain in sort of large sections. It doesn't just say, there was this war which led to the decline of Christianity and then into this. It talks about really minute details, which again, you notice in your day-to-day life. You'd never consider it as being having an effect on the way we live our lives. For example, he opens the first chapter, he mentions in the introduction, central heating.
Yeah, right, yeah. How like the discomfort of preheating life gather the family around the fire.
Yeah. Forced people into one room, and
Yeah.
when you're forced in one room, you sort of have to talk as part of social convention. But now central heating means people can be where they want, when they want, and a lot of families prefer to be separated.
Yeah, it's like I think Hitchens has this, and he gets it spot on there, which is it's almost like the exact opposite of serendipity.
Yeah. And I read a review which said that the abolition of Britain is nothing but a complaint about central heating and this and that, which is nonsense. It's not even to say that these things should be undone, even if they could be, which they can't. But just the very fact that he was able to recognise these points. I was reading, I included a piece by William Clouston in our latest issue, which, for those listening, whenever this goes out, is the 18th issue, and it's very Hitchenesque in that sense, actually, in that Clouston, when talking about the waning of the common life, doesn't just say people work from home now, or they work far away. He talks about really small details which we often wouldn't consider. For example, packed lunches, right? So before, there'd be free dinner ladies who would give out whatever food it was in that day. And there weren't all these food requirements, veganism or halal or whatever it might have been. There was one thing on the menu, you had it, and then you went onto the long tables and ate it next to your peers, which has been replaced by individualistic. That's something you'd never think of saying before the word packed lunch. That actually is, as Clouston points out, is what it is. Individualistic dinner. Someone eats by themselves outside something which has been pre-arranged at home and has nothing to do with anybody else on the yard or the playground, whatever you might call it. A really interesting point, and it's that minute detail which really impressed me with Hitchens's work. And actually the best chapter, if someone wants to read the book or is considering whether to read the book, pick it up in a bookshop if it stocks it, and read the chapter. I believe it's the first chapter, if not the second chapter, which goes through the story of a lady at the time of the death of Princess Diana, who has been transported back to the time of the death of Winston Churchill, and walks around that world and sees how differently they live. And again, it's not just the large points, but even the money that they hold, the format of the tills, the fact that the busman rips off tickets for people, and people are wearing hats and leather shoes, right, which have been repaired for years, rather than some trainers which are thrown away every 2 months. It's those small details which I find interesting, and although I suppose the downside there is that it's the addition of many small details which can't be changed, and which people don't want to change, which turns you, I suppose, into a pessimist and makes you realize we're not coming back from much of this.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you. Is that with Hitchens, there's obviously an intense pessimism, and I believe his advice to people our age is to leave this country and never return to it. Um, has it has a an interest in a writer like Hitchens had adverse effects on you? Has it, has it sort of entered your prism to the point where you look around the world or you look around the country and feel kind of despair clinging to everything?
I think um, there've been two, maybe three times at which I have spent possibly a week essentially in despair at the state of this country. Um, I won't go into the detail about them. At least not on recording.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, I'm with you, man. I've only recently read the abolition books in the last like month or so. But yeah, I mean it's stark, and that you mentioned the funerals of Diana and Churchill, what, 32 years apart?
Something like not very long, but the
Yeah.
amount of danger in even that small period is immense.
Yeah. I'd be curious to know what Hitchens thinks about something like decimalization and how that
I could tell you. You Right, you've not seen it. That's I think you must have an old version of the book because that's actually a large part of his post text in the most updated one, which is from
Yeah, no, because what is it the one that's Churchill to May or something?
yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I've got the Diana to Blair one.
Well, I think actually for Hitchens, this again is the intro. Well, just quickly actually on the despair point, that made it sound like it has made me really despairing in general life. The effect of his book, it hasn't. It's made me more interested and more perceptive. I think anyway. I mean, that's for other people to judge, I suppose. But I feel as though I'm more perceptive and take more of an interest. And whilst there are some things which have led me to, question the state of affairs, generally whilst not believing there's much hope for change, I am still interested in putting out a comment. I think one of the things Hitchens says in the book is that if nothing else, people from a future generation can look back and see why Britain fell. So I think maybe I choose to write and publish things for the same reason.
Okay, so let's move on to an area that you and I have discussed in private, which is music.
Mm.
Um, what is the first record on your list?
Well, when we said record, I presumed that with classical music, you'd go for a symphony as a record.
Yeah,
So the first one is Beethoven's Ninth. Um, I I've gone through a number of musical phases. I imagine most listeners, knowing me as only as a conservative, would not be surprised to hear Beethoven as one of the lists. But actually, I started my interest in music. I played in jazz bands for years and years as a child. And then through the influence of my dad, got into rock, and that sprung into heavy metal. And I've gone to all the festivals and done all the strange things that go
I'm
along
sorry,
with
but the very last thing I can picture you at right now is a metal show.
it. Me too, but it happened, and there's pictures to prove it. I don't know. Some might say it's a different person, but I do occasionally go back, and occasionally can't also help when I pick up the guitar playing some of these tunes because it's it's still embedded to an extent.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but anyway, I then played music through most of my life, and did it through sixth form and GCSE first, which among other things is where I met my other half, which I'm lucky for. Um, but um, I remember very well in GCSE music, we had to listen to music from different periods, and I hated all of them at the time because this was my metal phase. Um, First, it was Handel and the Glory of the Lord. I thought, ugh, what dross, how boring. And then it was Steve Reich, I think, some minimalist music, which I thought again crap. And then jazz, Miles Davis came on, rubbish, boring, 12 minutes of the same thing over and over and over again. Didn't like any of it. But actually, some of the classical music, whilst I said at the time I didn't like it and wrote reports on why I didn't like it, I couldn't help but ignore. sorry, I couldn't stop myself from not ignoring it, I mean to say. And I would end up listening to it in private, thinking, yeah, well, yeah, this has got something good behind it, I suppose. And that was my slow journey into classical music, which is now what I listen to most, and enjoy the most. And Beethoven is well, by far the best classical composer generally of all time, in my opinion, um, and that of all sensible people. I remember at first I didn't realize, just as a point to show how little I knew about classical music, that there were four movements within a symphony. So I listened to what I thought was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, but it was actually the second movement of it, and I enjoyed it. And I must have been listening on YouTube, because it then came up suggested movement four. I thought, crikey, there's another part of this thing, is there? So I clicked on it, listened to the fourth movement, which is the first time in classical music, in musical history, I suppose, that or rather in a symphony, that voices came out. There was a choir behind this and four solo singers, and it's a really powerful movement. And the choral work, being the choral symphony near the middle, still fills the room with emotion, I suppose you'd say. Is exciting but also moving, and that to me is the one of the most impressive pieces ever composed. The symphony as a whole, when listened to it, you get all the context. The same way with Tolstoy. If you took a page out of War and Peace just to try and make it a bit more manageable, you'd ruin the book. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is one of his longest, actually, I think, but an incredible work, which you really benefit for listening to the whole thing. And I've listened to it twice in different places, live, that is, and it's a monster of a piece. Very good.
What is your second record?
Well, I would easily have gone for more classical, but if there were three things that I could listen to for the rest of my life, I'd have to not do that. Whilst classical is my favorite genre, most of my favorite music is classical. There are other things I like as well, and the second would be Miles Davis, Kind of Blue.
Okay, because I think with Davis, there's you can either pick Kind of Blue or Sketches of Spain, right?
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason that Kind of Blue is my favorite is because it's the first that I came across. Again, GCSE music. One of the was all blues, which at the time I hated. Really tedious, really long and boring. Listening to it now, it's a brilliant work.
Yeah.
Really impressive. And the album as a whole, I think it's the musicianship on the album is very special. There's some great players. I mean, John Coltrane actually is on Kind of Blue as well, whose solo work is something I enjoy listening to. But as I say, I played jazz for some time when I was younger, and usually more big band stuff. So I suppose the sort of the Davis wouldn't come up very often, although Charles Mingus did, which I also enjoy. But no, it's again like classical, actually. A lot of people criticize jazz, especially sort of trad jazz, as being elevator music, they say, which shows the sort of cranky Americanism of it. Elevator music, but it's much more than that. It's something which, again, you can only properly appreciate if you're doing very little else, nothing else, preferably. Just sit down and listen to it, put it on a record. And yeah, I mean, he's a very talented musician, and he went into all sorts of weird phases later on. I don't actually like very much of Miles Davis' work in the later periods. It's too I don't know, too technical, I suppose, or techie at certain points. But the earlier trad stage, I could listen to over and over and over.
It's I think where it clashes with modern ears is that it's about a 45-minute long album, right? Kind of Blue.
Yeah.
It's about 5 songs.
Yeah, roundabout. I mean,
so the songs are quite stretched out. I mean, it opens with what's it called? So What, right? which is 9.5 minutes long. Then they're sort of they're longer than the kind of song you hear on the radio, and that's not a comment on Miles Davis or Kind of Blue. It's a comment on the modern listener
Hmm.
who's so spoiled by Spotify and that sort of thing that a song that's 9 minutes is beyond the pale.
Yeah, well, the point as well is that even if modern music were longer, it would have a chorus every 2 seconds,
Hmm.
and so people enjoy that. Whereas a lot of, not all of Kind of Blue, but a couple of the tracks have sort of head arrangements where you've got the head at the beginning, what we would know as being the piece, what you'd hum if you were trying to tell someone what it was, and then 8 minutes of solos, which are often based on the chords, but little else, just playing around the different instruments. And then the head again at the end, and then that's it. Possibly the head twice, which there's not enough in it that people can recognize or hum to, right? Only the very beginning and the very end. So I think that might be why modern audiences wouldn't enjoy it as much. But actually, I've got to the point where, I mean, there's two jazz albums which I adore. This is one of them. The other one is Charles Mingus' which I would just as easily have chosen as one of the top three. In fact, thinking about it, I don't know if I prefer that, but I won't change my mind now. But it's got to the point where I listen to these so much that I do know the solo lines throughout. I'm humming them to myself, which my partner doesn't like, and she tells me constantly I have this terribly annoying, addictive personality where I get into a style of music and I have to know everything about the composers, what made them write this, and have to listen to the same piece over and over and over, which means that she comes to hate them.
And your third and final record?
Well, you might guess this one. This, I suppose, is a slight.
Wait, hang on. Are you currently remaking it?
Well, maybe. This is a slight carry on from my rock stage. It's not particularly rocky, but it's more of that ilk. It's a piece which, you see, as I say, I used to go to these rock concerts, and at the end of the night, it's one of my dad's favorite albums, which is likely why it passed on. We would always end by sitting down and listening to The Dark Side of the Moon. Which, oh crikey, where do you start on that? I mean,
it's just a phenomenal. It's just a phenomenal record. It's as a unit. There are very, very few albums, if any at all, that work together as a cohesive singular block as well as that record.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I think a lot of modern pop music, and by pop I don't just mean modern pop, but popular in terms of rock as well and all that sort of stuff. You can get good albums. What's one of the most best-selling albums? Back in Black, probably, something like that. AC/DC, I think that's one of the
probably Dark Side of the Moon, to be honest.
I think Dark Side of the Moon is the top, but I'm trying to compare to other ones like Back in Black, where decent album, fair enough. You got a good few songs on there, but it's not really an album as such, in that it's something you put on and listen to the whole thing. You go, hey, my favorite track is track 4, put that one on, let's listen to that. My favorite's track 6, we'll put that one afterwards. Okay, you can listen to it on shuffle and it wouldn't affect your experience. But if you perchance put on Dark Side of the Moon on shuffle, you'll soon be incredibly disappointed, and you'll have to re-listen to the first, the brief piece again, because it's unbearable. You can't listen to one piece within that album and not absolutely desire to go on to the next straight away, to flow in. It's very gripping. Impressive work in that sense. I mean, really, the album works as two pieces. You've got both sides up until Great Gig in the Sky, and then From Money onwards. And there's impressive things you can say about the lyrics, and it's not just a selection of music. It's a concept album. It's about various.
It's about life. It's about life, right? It's about time, money. The Great Gig in the Sky being essentially about death, war. Just so much of it just comes sort of together, and it begins with the opening build up and then track, which is almost like it always felt to me like a sort of like a father telling his young son about what life's going to be like for him moving forward. Like the line is it digging holes all day, and then once you're done, don't get down, it's time to dig another one. Yeah. It's But again, it's so beautiful. But if you read it as if it were a poem or a passage in a novel, it would be, it's almost like a cautionary tale of all these things. And but also there's some really wicked like satire and humor too. I mean, Money is a great satirical song. I've seen people like reacting to that song, not realizing it was a joke, and hearing the lines about, get this stack, get another stack, and they'll be like, yes, get that money, without realizing that it's about, the carnage that comes with affluence. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so ends with some might ask for a pay rise, but they're given none the way, which
yeah.
my favourite line of it.
Yeah. I love the bits of dialogue that just come in and out randomly. Like in the Money at one point, someone saying, "Oh, he was cruising for a bruising," and talking about like,
Yeah.
um,
Well, that again is one of these. It's very organic because the band members had interviews with the records producers, the roadies, the technicians,
yeah, I
talk to
think
them about
one,
life. And
yeah,
that's what.
I think the guy who's like, I've always been mad. That guy. I think he was like the security guard in Abbey Road Studios.
Yeah, yeah. What he says is, I've always been mad, been working with bands all my life, something like that. So that's his point.
Yeah. So
Really interesting, actually.
and then after that he says, you have to explain why you're mad even when you're not mad. It's just, yeah, it's just really interesting.
Almost like you're watching the Joker at that point.
Yeah.
No, what I was going to say though, I mean, we've talked about the meaning of the words, but my point was, regardless of that, it's a tremendous album musically. I mean, the Rick Wright, the keyboardist, and Gilmore and Waters as well, and Nick Mason are tremendous musicians. I mean, underrated, I think, massively because it's one of those where it's slightly older. I think what is this, 72, something like
Three.
that.
Three. Three.
73, they were a little bit older, and so they're considered as not being as technical because Gilmore doesn't do really quick solos. People now think, well, it's all right, but it's a bit tame. But actually, the musical experimentation they were going for at the time was really impressive. Where, say, the second piece, On the Run, the first time that a sequencer really was used in albums.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was, a, it
yeah.
was a new sequencer which had just come out. They were
Mm.
using this technology and all the different effects, and it's a great documentary to watch, the making of the Dark Side of the Moon, because say for example the song Time, at the beginning you've got the alarms going off and the clocks. There weren't samples for this at the time. No one had done it before, so they literally had a studio full of clocks and alarm clocks, and for money they had to literally record someone pulling.
Yeah, it was I think Roger Waters was like chucking coins into like a vase or something in his garden, and that's how they got the opening, the coins dropping.
Right. Yeah.
And sonically it's a very impressive album too.
There's so much. What I like about it is that, I mean, I think sometimes when I listen to like live music, I can't help but try and think of myself playing it because that's what I enjoy doing. If I could be at that level, it'd be tremendous. I'd give up politics tomorrow, or well, right now, actually today, to play live music. It's so much better and less confrontational. But just to imagine having done, not only having sat down and recorded, well, written, thought about, recorded, stressed over the music, but also the silly things like throwing the money in a vase, like you say, and arranging the clocks in order to all go off at the same time and to record that and all the other elements, and to sit down and listen to it and think, I've just done all that. Must be incredibly impressive. Whereas today, not only would the sound effects for the clocks be done automatically on a screen because there's already all the samples, but even like the drum fills would be automated. You just get, let's get the sample from 2019 from Dr. Dre's such and such and put that onto the tune. That'll sound hit, whatever. Some nonsense where just not only a lack of creativity, but a lack of effort, which ruins so much modern music, I think.
Now, for the film, I've known for a couple of weeks that we were going to pick the same film because it came up naturally when we were talking once, and it turns out we have the same favorite film.
Have the same random obsession.
Yeah,
It's come across an obsession with spaghetti westerns.
yeah,
I don't know many people have that.
bizarre. So yes, I mean we're obviously alluding to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The triumphant finale of Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy.
Mm.
Um, well, yeah, just give me your introduction to that film.
Mind what? How to sell it to somebody? Well, I don't know how I'd do that. It took me. I've been with my better half for 4 years. Tomorrow, when recording, or 2 days. It took me a good 2.5 of those years to come to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with her to persuade. And she did enjoy it, but I don't know. It's perhaps a little too long for her taste. But it's. I mean, what to say? It's so many things in one film. One of the things which I love about Sergio Leone as a director, which we alluded to earlier, is the same reason that I enjoy War and Peace and Les Miserables, and to an extent s01, is that no time is spared in terms of detail. If there's something which needs to be added, you don't prioritize the fact that it's going to add another 5 minutes and that's not good. You prioritize the fact that this is great content, let's put it in there. And the opening, well, in fact, a lot of this was slimmed by the American editors of the film, shamefully. I think the film is actually supposed to be much longer than it is. What is it? I think as it stands, it's about nearly 3 hours, maybe.
It's about 2.5 hours long. Yeah.
2.5, right. Yeah. I think the final director's cut, I don't know if it's available to watch. I'd love to watch it if it is, but is well over that. Well over.
Once Upon a Time in the West is really long.
Yeah. Well, so the opening shot, as I say, is nothing but a small village, well, small town rather, or there's only about 3 buildings in the west. The sun's quite high. Nothing's going on other than a dog walking across the screen. Now, in the final cut, the edited cut, I think that's about 30 seconds worth of film. In the director's cut, I think it was over a minute that it was actually there.
Well, two things come to mind there. And before that, I will say, because I'll probably revise and pick a different film for mine, just so we aren't repeating ourselves. I'd say it's probably holistically the greatest thing ever to film. In terms, when you factor in not only the dialogue or lack thereof in the case of the protagonist, the cinematography, the scale, the score, everything about the movie just comes together perfectly. And if one of those elements is missing, it's a lesser film.
Yeah.
And so 2 scenes come to mind. The first, they're very close together towards the end of the film. The first is when Tuco's running through the graveyard.
Yeah.
He goes off his horse, lands on a grave, realizes where he is, and he's just. I mean, if you look at it without the music, right? And I've tried watching that scene muted. It's not the same. It's just some guy kind of running a little bit ferally through a graveyard, right? While the camera spins every now and then. But with the Ecstasy of Gold, it's so compelling. And my favorite bit of music from that film is the shootout at the end. I think the score is called The Trio.
Yeah.
That scene's about 9 minutes long.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It's 9 minutes of zooming in on someone's hand, slowly going near a gun,
and then pulling back again.
Nothing happens.
Yeah.
I think that's what I realize I like in films where there's 30 minutes where nothing happens, a minute where it goes,
yeah,
and then it goes back to nothing for another.
Yeah. That's the thing is that I remember watching it. So the first time I watched that movie was in year 9. My school had a film club, and you'd go after school and you watch a film. And one of them was The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And this girl in the classroom was saying that she liked it, but the shootout was too long at the end and nothing happened.
Right.
I was like, that's kind of it, though, isn't it? It's kind of like it happens very slowly and then very fast.
Yeah.
Because it's just a quick draw from Blondie.
Well, let's not spoil there. Come on.
Oh, no, apologies. But no. If you haven't seen a film made in 1968, that's on you. You mentioned the bit with the hand moving towards. I think that bit is absolutely genius. Where I can't remember his name. The bad. he mentions to Tuco earlier in the film that Blondie's a better shot than him.
Mm.
And then later on, when they're sort of staring each other down, you see his hand just incrementally moves across them. Blondie just like glances an eye at him, and he sort of moves back again, and you can see the fear in his face after that. He's like, he kind of knows it's it, and it's just, oh, I love it. And when the trumpet kicks in, and the shot is so perfect, and they're all kind of rotating around to form the circle, and it's like they're in a graveyard, so it's like this like heavenly trumpet sound while the dead are watching. It's phenomenal.
And again, small bits of useless knowledge are helpful for that film, or at least make it more entertaining. For example, Eli Wallach, The Ugly, which is unfairly titled, I think. It's not that.
He's not hideous. He isn't hideous.
It's not hideous. His gun, you'll notice, is never in a holster. Even when he goes...
Yeah, it's in his pocket, yeah.
Either on his pocket or on a string. Even
Yeah.
when he goes to a gun shop to pick up, he goes into this expensive shop, takes ages picking out a great gun and fixing it apart and all that. Rather than taking a holster, he takes a string. Now, the reason is, when you think of a Western actor, you think of John Wayne and Clint Eastwood. You think of them spinning the gun into the holster after shooting without looking, magnificently, possibly twice, one on each hand. Eli Wallach couldn't do that. You notice in the other films like The Magnificent Seven, he's always looking very carefully, could never get to grip with it. He must have spent decades in Western films, could never do it. He wants, even these guns obviously didn't have shots in them, but to make the sound work, because there was less technology, again, more interesting, again with the Pink Floyd stuff, he once accidentally shot his leg, not with a bullet, but with a blank, which still burnt his leg terribly.
Yeah.
So that's one element, which is, there's a scene in The Magnificent Seven, which I like, where they're going up a hill towards a graveyard to bury two criminals or Mexicans, I think, who the locals don't want to be buried there because they're Mexican. And there's a section where a man stands up in a window and is going to shoot them, but the guy riding shotgun, for a named reason, as you'll see, gets his shotgun out and shoots up at the window. There weren't small enough explosions at the time that could make the glass smash and make it look realistic like a shot. So the gun was actually shot, a real bullet. So the guy behind the window had to quickly duck to make sure he wasn't hit. That's sort of how real these films were, because they were made such a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's still elements like that which make them even more interesting to watch whilst you're watching, because you think, so much of this really happened. For example, with I might be wrong on this, but I think I've heard the bridge scene in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There's a bridge which is being fought over because it's filmed during, set rather, during the Civil War. It wasn't actually filmed then. So you get the story around that, which is, again, very interesting, at times moving. And there's a bridge which the North and South are fighting over, and the good and the ugly blow it up so that they can get to the other side, because the battle there is preventing them from swapping over. And I'm pretty sure it was blown up once accidentally out of shot and had to be rebuilt and blown up again to make sure everything worked properly.
Wow.
Which must have been incredible.
That I didn't know. I did know that, the bit where the bad turns up and he pulls a gun on Blondie, and he's like, Blondie's like, if you shoot me, you won't see any of that money. And he sort of shows that the grave is actually empty and there's a skeleton inside. That's a real person.
Really?
Yeah, it's a real person who, in their will, wanted to be in a film.
Really? Yeah. I did not know that. That was good. I like it. You wouldn't be allowed to do that today. It wouldn't be.
Oh God, no. Oh God, no. No, health and safety would get on that immediately. There's in that same scene, actually, there's a bit about Tuco that I really like, where, because the gun's in his pocket, right? He's sort of like moving his hand up to the pocket, and then Blondie kind of like, sort of notices and kind of like sets him straight, and then Tuco kind of like flattens out the pocket and kind of looks at him like, yeah. It's like, I'm at least gonna try, and that's what I love about his performance, is that he's the most duplicitous, backstabbing, untrustworthy little bastard, but he's so lovable.
Yeah, he is.
Okay, let's move on to your inanimate object, which I think is the most interesting one to get down into, because it's almost, the attachment to it is purely personal rather than how good a film or book or record is.
Well, I'm going to be quite predictable, I suppose, and say, well, as debating which one, but I suppose it ends up having to be a guitar. I started playing piano recently, but I think if I were trapped somewhere alone with just this thing, I'd soon get frustrated with myself for not being better than I am.
Mm.
But guitar, I've played for a bit longer, so I'll. And also, you can play all sorts of different styles on it. So you can play your jazz, your rock when you need to, and classical and country. Which, by the way, I love. If it were 4 records, I would have chosen a Johnny Cash because I
Right. Okay.
adore Johnny Cash and his music and country music generally, a brilliant thing. But yes, I think it'd have to be a guitar that I'd take.
Do you
I,
do you, do
I'd
you
say
find it?
I'm thinking too much about the Desert Island Disc thing, which we've stolen from essentially. But no, this is just an object generally which we like. Yes, and that's the one.
Do you find it quite easy to learn a new instrument then? Because you said you've just started playing piano recently. I mean, but you said it as if it was like a just a throwaway comment rather than like a new commitment in life.
Um, well, I don't find it easy, but as I say, because of the aspect of my personality, which in some regards is good and many is bad, I get hooked on things, and I if I start doing something, I want to try and carry it out to its extreme, which I suppose is why I've managed to run the magazine. I've run a number of publications in the past, and in the odd occasion in between where I couldn't cope with it. I'd read something, I'd think I have to publish on this. I need to get to write something. I enjoy editing, producing things. Um, and it's the same with music. I was made to play the trumpet when I was about 4, and carried that through, which taught me the basics of reading music and I suppose some general music theory, although I'm not too hot on that. And it's just something I enjoy doing. It's my sort of spare time
Mm,
activity,
mm,
playing music.
mm.
So it it took me a while, I think, to learn the guitar. I was very, very rubbish for a little bit of time. But as soon as I got half decent, it made it easier to then obviously learn to play the bass. I started playing the banjo for a small amount of time, and then also like a scene from Deliverance, and then piano as well. Whilst very different, I think knowing the idea behind chords, which you don't learn obviously when playing the trumpet, since it's one note at a time, unless you're very impressive. There's a musician who I can't remember the name of, but who both hums and plays a note at once, 2 different notes, which is quite funny to watch. But no, once you understand the importance of chords and how to transition, and different formats of chords, the seventh and all that sort of stuff, you it makes it a little bit easier to start learning piano. Although if you want something more technical, which isn't just based on chords, then it takes a bit more time. But I'm slowly getting somewhere.
Now we're into the last two categories, which are also very interesting. We'll start with your chosen figure from history.
Mm. No, see, I didn't know what to say for this. But one of my other interests for reading, um, I don't know where it came from, actually. I suppose I talked to my grandfather about the war quite a lot. He's very interested in it. Um, One of the avenues of reading which I've come to take up the most is the reading of accounts of the Holocaust. Um, Individuals, mainly Primo Levi, who's written excellent works. If this is a man being the best of them. Um, and Eli Wiesel, who wrote Night, their accounts of life, if you'd call it that, but more existence for those who could exist and continue to do so in Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen, the other camps, is, if nothing else, a very interesting study again of humanity. That's what Primo Levi wrote mainly. It wasn't so much an account of what happened in the camps. It was a study of human nature, how different people reacted to the events and came accustomed to them, or didn't in many cases, and what sort of men or women they became. And he, in his book, Fit as a Man, he goes through the main four sort of types of people that he saw in camps, obviously across many people. There were four main characteristic types. Were really interesting to read, and how he himself came to live at the time. Very upsetting reading these works, but again, very interesting to see how people fit into trying circumstances. So I think an evening with Primo Levi would be not possible now, but would have been very interesting. He certainly had lived a life, let's say that. There's a few people about whom you could say that, and he's one of them.
It's a very fascinating answer, because if you mention that name to most people in the pub, they'd ask who.
Well, yeah, I suppose.
No, that is deeply fascinating. And the angle and sort of someone being in that situation and being able to find fragments of humanity where it's generally speaking quite lost. So was it you who's telling me about this? It might have even be from his writings, where there was a guy who'd wash himself every day.
Well, yeah, this is the book. So I think Primo Levi was once in the washroom, and he was basically saying there's only so much energy you have through the day, because you're only given this small scrap of food, and there's no warmth, and your clothes are tattered. So the only energy you have is from that little grain of food, which you've got to take through until the next day, after hours of work slugging about. And so he would say, why waste the energy that you have got rubbing yourself clean when the soap they give you isn't good enough anyway, and when the water's probably ferociously cold? Why waste that energy cleaning yourself when, one, you're only going to dirty yourself within 10 minutes because you go straight back out into the hard some work, and also at the end of the day, it's not very long until you're going to die, and there's nobody around you who you're trying to impress. So what's the point? And he was thinking like this, and I think he went into the washroom and said to someone, what are you doing? Who was washing thoroughly. What's the point? You're wasting your time. And this person, an old learned man, gave him a very stern look. And I won't do any of it justice. And in fact, Primo Levi says himself, I won't do it justice when writing this, because I can't quite remember, for my shame, he wrote what he said precisely. But the point basically was that don't take yourself down to the level that they want you to. They want to dehumanize you. That's what the tattoo's about. That's what the number is about. That's what the sluggish work is about. And having mismatched shoes, wearing the same uniform as everybody else, sleeping not by yourself, but next to somebody else in a room full of hundreds of other bodies. Never having a private moment, because within private moments you can think about things, and it's from thought that springs rebellion. So always being uniform with everybody else. But this man says, no, don't bend to that. Try and hold on to the last scrap of humanity you've got, if nothing else, just to prove that you are still human, that they haven't won. Even if they manage to kill you, which they probably will, even if not directly through shooting or beating, whatever, then through the work and the lack of food, and the lack of healthcare and such, that will kill you. Even if that's the case, which in most cases it was, millions of cases, you have still held onto your humanity, which is an important point in and of itself. It's sort of a small victory within a larger field of feat. And again, I've not done that justice. You must read it to properly appreciate it. And I'm sure there's much that I've missed out. But again, the lessons this man learned, I think that was sort of a changing moment for him when he was in Auschwitz, to change the way he viewed other people and circumstances generally afterwards. And he sort of changed his view of other people because of that short monologue. So yeah, a lot of interesting lessons, I think.
Have you been to Auschwitz?
Yes.
It's chilling, isn't it?
It is. I think about this often, actually. whether or not it should even be there now. I think some people say that it's sort of like a graveyard, and so should be kept as is. Although when I went there, you've got the tracks leading up to Auschwitz to Birkenau.
Yeah, people pose on the tracks and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
posing selfies, people
yeah,
peace sign, fingers up
yeah.
there. And it made me think this shouldn't be here. This is ridiculous. Also, we went. I was lucky to go with the Holocaust Educational Trust, so it was a bit of an educational package. I didn't just go to Poland to Krakow and then go to Auschwitz. We went on a tour around Oswiecim, which is the town where Auschwitz is located first, and saw the site of a previous synagogue, right, where a synagogue once stood before it was burned down, and went to one of the other synagogues which still remained, where people had tried to hide their belongings. This is one of the sad parts, and the Nazis were very clever about this. There were note makers of all kinds. Where they would say to people, make sure to write your name down on your luggage and where you're from so that it could be handed back afterwards. Everything was duly noted. But at the same time, people who were going to the camp were told that they would come back in some cases. And so there was sort of a storage site at some synagogues where people would leave their belongings so they could pick it up when they came back. But of course, for many, the day didn't come. Most, again. And then we went to Auschwitz I and then Birkenau itself. And yeah, I mean, Auschwitz I was somber. You walk around and you see some of the chimney and the house just across where one of the commandants lived, one of the rulers of the camp, which is strange. His family lived there as well. But one of the things you don't notice is that it's right opposite now a child's playground. And Birkenau is right in front of a main road, which people drive past every day for work. And I don't know. I saw this and I thought, I'm not sure this should be here. I don't
Yeah.
get it, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, and that it should be as a point of remembrance. The thing that struck me most was how big Birkenau was. When I was stood at the entrance of Birkenau, the second part of Auschwitz, you look forward, left, and right, and you literally cannot see the end.
Yeah.
It is that big. And that's not an exaggeration. I could not see the end. It was incredible, unbelievable how big this thing was, and how large a scale as well of suffering that took place within it. So, yeah, I think Primo Levi is a very long form answer.
Okay.
Someone who, if I were able to have a discussion with, well, I say have a discussion. I imagine I'd spend 10 minutes with my mouth, with my lips tightly sealed, but my ears open. That's how it would work.
Yeah. And lastly, your modern figure.
I struggled on this one. There's nobody like that today where I would want to listen because of the lessons they might want to give in terms of lived experiences as such. As some people, I'm sure, but no one that springs to mind as much as in that case. But one of the figures who I became most interested in as I started to get interested in politics was Peter Hitchens, and I think it would be someone who, because of his experience of living in Russia and reporting from Russia and having visited many countries around the world, and also being for a very long time a lone voice on Britain's decline, on pointing out very particular failures and the dangers of certain things, the destruction of grammar schools, the introduction of sex education, mass immigration, all these things which sometimes get criticized now. There's more discussion, especially about mass immigration, but around the moralistic points like sex education, people are still very silent on. People york back to Mary Whitehouse and try and label modern critics of state-sponsored immorality as being like that. But Hitchens, I think, has hit the nail on the head on this topic, despite being covered, as he would say, in buckets of slime for a long time. And I think it's someone who a lot can be learned from, because of his sort of worldly experience as well as his insight. aspects.
How do you
So,
think? How do you think those two would interact?
well, Primo Levi and Peter
Yeah.
Hitchens. Well, I imagine Hitchens again would do as I would do and close his lips for 10 minutes and listen only to Primo Levi
Hmm.
the experiences. I don't know. I'd imagine there'd be great respect there because the impressive thing to go back to him about Primo Levi is that having gone through such a hideous thing, one of the worst things that a human could suffer, he managed to come out and write it down and put it into book form. And I find that incredibly impressive. Unbelievably so, that someone wouldn't simply sit down and willow in depression for the rest of their lives, but instead say, I'm going to get a pen, I'm going to put my thoughts to paper, and I'm going to then talk about this and try and change something or make people realize what happened. So I think Hitchens would acknowledge that and listen.
Michael, that was your life in 10.